My boyfriend told his friends he didn't want me to have his baby because I was getting too fat during pregnancy, so I left him, gave birth, and had a glow up. I then found someone who actually loved me, and that made my ex go psycho. He crashed our wedding and forced me to take everything from him. Josh and I have been together for the last 4 years, and I am currently 7 months pregnant. We met through a dating app, hitting it off over a shared love of nerdy comics and lame action movies. Our relationship moved at a pace we liked, moving in after 2 years, becoming parents to a cat after 3, and learning that I was pregnant last January. The day we found out was the best of my life. He had been pushing for us to have a baby, and when I came around to it and we saw those 2 lines, we were elated. We immediately started planning for the arrival of our bundle of joy. Well, in reality, it was mostly me planning everything and Josh just going with it. He didn't even seem to care what gender the baby was going to be, which was extremely odd, given how excited he was beforehand. About 2 months into my pregnancy, he started making questionable comments about us having the kid. It wasn't anything too negative, but enough to plant a seed of doubt in my mind. Whenever I showed him potential cribs, strollers, or nurseries, he'd say things like, "Why can't they just sleep beside us? Or why don't we leave it for now and decide later?" I brushed it off as him being nervous at first, but then came the ignoring of my questions about the baby. I'd send him pictures or themes for nurseries, and all he'd say in response was, "Sure," or "Cool, looks fine, I guess." He blamed it on being stressed, saying he couldn't handle all this. I remember feeling very hurt by this. My bump had started really growing. I was in more and more pain by the day. My hormones were all over the place. I'd randomly start crying out of nowhere. All I wanted was to lie down and give my body a break, but I was pushing through, planning everything. And here he was, too stressed to help. I still pushed all my feelings away until last month, when he started hanging out with a co-worker named Bill more often. I remember begging him to stay home, telling him I was in a lot of pain and needed him here, but he'd just brush me off because he needed to distress. He'd go to Bill's 2 or 3 times per week, and when he'd come home and find me throwing up in the bathroom, he'd barely check on me. Sure, he brought me a blanket and some water, but not much more than that. It got to a point where he stopped showing me any sort of affection. I couldn't get as much as a hug good night from him, much less a kiss or anything more intimate. I remember talking to my best friend Susie about it, and she told me some guys can act this way before becoming fathers, and suggested I get him a parenting book to ease his nerves. So last week, I got him a book suited for anxious, expecting fathers. I even cooked him a 3-course meal from scratch while freaking pregnant, so it would be ready by the time he got back from work. Well, that night was a disaster. Josh barely looked at me while we ate, and when I gave him the book, he dropped a bomb. He wanted me to terminate the pregnancy. I was stunned. He was the one who pushed for the baby in the first place. I pressed him, and he said he'd realized he's not sure if he's ready to be a dad, referencing how Bill regrets having his kids. I wanted to break down and cry, wondering how he was letting his co-worker affect his judgment. The rest of the night was silent and extremely tense. We didn't speak until the morning, when I headed out to grab breakfast alone and think about it. I remember calling Susie, and she talked me through everything. I felt slightly better. Coming home that evening, I had a clearer head and had made a mental note of all the talking points I needed to have with Josh. Until I got a text from Richard, one of Josh's other co-workers. He asked me if I was okay. We had only met twice before, so I was extremely confused. I responded that I was then asked why he was texting me. He immediately dropped the subject. I wanted to ignore it, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I called him, and when he answered, he sounded nervous, like he was hiding something. I questioned him over and over until he spilled. The co-workers were all congratulating Josh on the pregnancy, but when Bill asked Josh if he was ready for his wife to never be the same, Josh said he had concerns. When Richard interrupted, asking Josh what he meant, Josh said something like, "She's just getting fatter. It's not pretty to look at, and I've seen the horror stories. Women have a kid and then become too lazy to lose the fat. I don't want to sleep with her and pretend I find it hot for the rest of my life." He then chuckled, trying to play it off as some joke. Richard said he and some guys called Josh out for that, but Josh doubled down on his statement. I cried in the park for hours after that call. Josh, the supposed love of my life, who promised me the world, publicly admitted that me getting fat and ugly was the reason he didn't want to have our kid. I drove home determined to confront Josh about his betrayal, but my hands were shaking so badly I nearly crashed the car. I had to pull over and practice what I would say, recording voice notes to keep myself focused. It took me almost 30 minutes to calm down enough to drive again. My pregnancy app pinged with a notification that my baby was now the size of an avocado, which made me cry all over again. When I finally arrived home, I found Josh playing video games as if nothing was wrong. He hadn't even noticed I'd been gone for hours. Seeing his casual indifference made my blood boil, so I unplugged his console mid-game, forcing him to acknowledge me. He jumped up, yelling about losing his progress until he saw my face. I must have looked like hell, because he immediately backed up a few steps. I calmly showed Josh the text from Richard, asking if they were true. Instead of denying it, he became defensive, saying Richard was exaggerating, so I realized he wasn't even going to try denying his disgusting comments. I stood there, watching his face for any sign of remorse, but found none. Josh tried turning the situation around, claiming I was overreacting due to pregnancy hormones' classic gaslighting move, but I refused to let him gaslight me. I played the voice recording I'd secretly made of my call with Richard, where every disgusting detail was laid bare. I watched Josh's face change as he heard himself described. I still remember how his Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed nervously. The color drained from his face as he heard himself described, mocking my body. But rather than apologize, he doubled down, saying, "You have to admit, you've let yourself go. I literally hadn't even gained that much weight yet, mostly just my belly showing. I grabbed my emergency bag I'd packed for hospital stays and told him I was leaving." I couldn't stand to look at him another second. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice trying to get out the door. Josh suddenly panicked, blocking the door and begging me to stay, but his pleas felt hollow after everything I'd learned. I called Susie to come get me, refusing to spend another minute with him. He kept trying to touch my stomach, which made me feel sick. I flinched every time his hand came near me, like my body was physically rejecting his presence. While waiting for Susie, Josh switched tactics, crying and claiming he was just scared about becoming a father. The tears looked fake AF. I noticed he kept glancing at my stomach with disgust. That's when I realized our entire relationship had been built on lies. I felt so stupid for believing he ever wanted this baby. All those conversations about baby names and nursery colors, complete BS. Susie arrived and helped me gather my essential belongings, but Josh followed us around the apartment, alternating between threats and pleas. Susie recorded his behavior on her phone as evidence. He kept trying to grab things out of my hands. As we were leaving, Josh grabbed my arm, begging for one more chance, but his grip tightened painfully when I refused. I could feel his fingernails digging into my skin. Susie threatened to call the police, finally made him back off. I had bruises the next day. In Susie's car, I broke down completely, 7 months pregnant, with nowhere to go. But Susie reminded me I had people who truly cared about me. We drove to her apartment, where she had already prepared her guest room. I felt lost and terrified that night. I couldn't sleep, worrying about my future as a single mother. But feeling my baby kick reminded me what was truly important. I started making lists of steps I needed to take to protect myself and my child. The list helped me focus through my panic. I went through an entire notepad that night, the pages wet with tears. The next morning, I called my OB/GYN to inform them about the situation, but they warned me about the stress affecting the baby. I scheduled an emergency appointment to check on my baby's health. My blood pressure was dangerously high. The nurse gave me a teddy bear to squeeze during the ultrasound, which made me feel like a child, but it helped. I contacted a lawyer to understand my options regarding Josh and custody, but the legal advice was complicated and expensive. The retainer alone was more than my monthly rent. I reached out to a women's resource center that offered free legal guidance for expectant mothers. They were incredibly helpful with the paperwork. The woman who helped me had been through something similar and gave me her personal number. When I checked my phone, I had 37 missed calls and dozens of texts from Josh, but reading his messages showed he was more concerned about himself than me or our baby. I blocked his number, needing space to think clearly. His messages were all about how I was ruining his life. Not a single one asked if the baby was okay. Susie suggested I should inform our mutual friends about what happened, but I was afraid they wouldn't believe me over Josh. I decided to write everything down with Richard's testimony as proof and share it only with those I truly trusted. Most of them were shocked but supportive. A couple of people blamed my pregnancy hormones, which told me exactly who wasn't really my friend. After a week at Susie's, I returned to our apartment with 2 friends to collect more of my belongings, but discovered Josh had changed the locks. I had to call a locksmith and show my lease agreement to prove I lived there. It cost me $200 I couldn't afford. Inside, I found Josh had trashed many of my personal items, including nursery supplies I'd bought, but the damage made me more determined to get everything I needed. He'd even torn pages from my pregnancy journal, where I documented all the little milestones. We quickly packed my car with as much as possible, including important documents. He'd even cut up the baby clothes I bought. I saw pieces of the onesie my mom had sent from across the country in the trash. I filed for a restraining order after documenting the property damage, but the judge only granted a temporary order saying there wasn't enough evidence of physical danger. I installed security apps on my phone to record any future interactions. I felt like no one was taking this seriously. With Susie's help, I found a small one-bedroom apartment I could afford on my savings. But the landlord seemed hesitant to rent to a pregnant woman with no current job. My parents had to co-sign the lease. Despite our strained relationship, Mom kept saying, "I told you so about Josh." She'd never liked him, which annoyed me at the time, but it turned out she had better instincts than I did. Moving day should have been a fresh start, but I spotted Josh's car parked down the street watching me. My brother KB and his friends formed a protective circle around me while we unloaded. Josh didn't approach but took pictures of us. That night, Josh sent emails from new addresses, alternating between apologies and accusations, but I refused to respond to any of them. He escalated to creating fake social media accounts to contact me. One message threatened to take the baby when it was born. I reported the harassment to the police, but the officer dismissed it as just a domestic dispute between parents-to-be. I started documenting everything meticulously, creating a paper trail they couldn't ignore. The officer actually yawned while taking my report. At my 32-week appointment, I spotted Josh in the hospital parking lot, but my doctor took my concerns seriously. The hospital assigned me a special check-in procedure and escorted me to my car afterward. I felt like a prisoner in my own life. Josh's mother, Marlo, called, claiming she wanted to help mediate, but she actually tried to convince me I was being cruel, keeping a father from his child. I recorded the conversation and added it to my growing evidence file. She called me horrible names when I refused to meet with Josh. I attended a support group for single mothers but felt overwhelmed hearing about the struggles ahead. A group member named Award offered to mentor me. Having been through a similar situation 5 years earlier, she became a lifeline for practical advice. Award helped me draft a birth plan that excluded Josh, but the hospital required both parents' information. I had to provide documentation of the restraining order and work with a patient advocate to ensure my safety. The bureaucracy was exhausting. I found flowers on my doorstep with no card, but my doorbell camera showed Josh delivering them at 3:00 a.m. I reported the restraining order violation, only to be told it was a harmless gesture. The officer even suggested I should appreciate the romance. I wanted to scream. My car's tires were slashed in my apartment parking lot, but there were no security cameras to prove who did it. I had to spend money I couldn't afford on repairs and a steering wheel lock. I was now taking Ubers to doctor appointments. The drivers always wanted to chat about my pregnancy, asking innocent questions like, "Is your husband excited?" That made me want to cry. Susie suggested I stay with her again until the baby came, but I refused to be driven from my new home. I asked KB to stay with me temporarily, turning my living room into his bedroom. He snored loudly, but I felt safer with him there. As my due date approached, my anxiety worsened with every strange noise, but KB taught me self-defense techniques adapted for my pregnant state. I began to feel less helpless, though still constantly vigilant. I jumped at every sound outside my door. Every time the floorboards creaked, I'd break into a cold sweat. At 36 weeks, I woke to someone trying to open my apartment door at midnight, but the new deadbolt KB had installed held firm. I called 911 while my brother confronted Josh through the door. Josh was yelling that he just wanted to see his baby. The police finally arrived and found Josh clearly intoxicated, but they still seemed reluctant to arrest him. KB filmed the entire interaction while I reminded the officers about my restraining order. One officer knew Josh from high school, which made me nervous. Josh was arrested for violating the restraining order, but was released on bail the next morning. I filed for an emergency hearing to extend and strengthen the protection order. I felt like I was fighting the system alone. At the hearing, Josh appeared with an expensive lawyer who painted him as a concerned father-to-be. But Richard testified about Josh's true comments at work. The judge extended the restraining order and added stricter provisions. Josh glared at me throughout the hearing. Josh lost his job after Richard's testimony revealed his character, but this left him with nothing to lose. His harassment intensified, now including calls to my workplace claiming I was unstable. He told my co-workers I had threatened to hurt myself and the baby. My boss, George, was initially understanding about the situation, but the constant disruptions began affecting business. I was placed on early maternity leave, cutting my income when I needed it most. I had to apply for emergency assistance to cover rent. I discovered Josh had been spreading lies in our friend circle, claiming I had cheated and the baby wasn't his. But several friends saw through his lies. They created a rotation schedule to check on me daily. I was grateful but felt like a burden. One night, I received a text from an unknown number with pictures of me inside my apartment. But I couldn't figure out how they were taken. KB and I searched the entire place, eventually finding a hidden camera in the smoke detector. It had been recording for weeks. The police were called about the hidden camera, but they said they couldn't prove Josh installed it. I contacted a private security company to sweep my entire apartment. I felt violated, knowing he'd been watching me. The security company found 2 more cameras and evidence my computer had been hacked. But the cost of their services depleted my savings. I had to start a crowdfunding campaign to help with expenses. People online were surprisingly generous. The campaign gained attention, bringing support from strangers. But Josh discovered it and left threatening comments. My friends documented everything and reported him for further restraining order violations. One comment said he'd get me eventually. Josh was arrested again for the violations, but managed to post bail quickly. I realized the legal system wasn't going to truly protect me before the baby arrived. I felt completely helpless against his determination. In desperation, I contacted Josh's parents, hoping they might control their son, but they defended him, saying I was ruining his life. I decided I needed to take more drastic measures for my safety. His father actually threatened to sue me for alienation of affection. I considered moving to another state to escape, but learned I couldn't legally take my baby across state lines without court approval. I needed to find another solution that wouldn't jeopardize my parental rights. Every option seemed to have impossible complications. After consulting with the ward and other survivors, I made a difficult decision, but worried about potential consequences. I invited Josh to meet me in a public cafe, planning to secretly record our conversation to get solid evidence. KB thought I was crazy, but understood my plan. I arrived at the cafe early, setting up my phone to record and choosing a table near security cameras. But my hands were shaking with anxiety. I texted KB, who was positioned nearby, ready to intervene if needed. I ordered tea but couldn't drink it. Josh arrived, looking surprisingly put together, and immediately began a charm offensive. But I steered the conversation toward his behavior. He gradually dropped the act, growing irritated when I wouldn't be manipulated. He kept trying to touch my hand. I calmly asked why he'd been harassing me, but his response was chilling. "You took my baby and ruined my reputation, so I'm taking your peace of mind." I realized he viewed this as revenge, not about our child at all. His eyes were cold as he said this. I pushed further, asking about the cameras in my apartment, but he smirked, asking how I enjoyed the show. I had explicit confirmation of his actions, which I knew would hold up in court. He seemed proud of how he terrorized me. When I mentioned his comments about my body to co-workers, his facade completely dropped, but I wasn't prepared for his vicious verbal assault that followed. Other cafe patrons began staring as he called me disgusting names. A woman at the next table looked horrified. The cafe manager, Karma, approached, asking if everything was okay, but Josh grabbed my wrist painfully under the table. I loudly announced I was 7 months pregnant and being threatened. Several people stood up immediately. Josh immediately switched tactics, claiming I was having a mental breakdown, but multiple witnesses had heard his tirade. Karma asked him to leave, while a customer who happened to be a nurse checked on me. The nurse gave me water and helped me breathe. Josh refused to leave, causing a scene, but this only created more witnesses. KB finally stepped in, along with 2 other customers, physically escorting Josh outside. One man told Josh he should be ashamed of himself. I was shaken but triumphant, having gotten solid evidence. But as I left the cafe, I saw Josh vandalizing my car. KB called the police while I filmed from a safe distance. Josh was slashing my tires and breaking windows. The police arrived quickly this time and arrested Josh on the spot, but I started experiencing contractions from the stress. The nurse from the cafe helped me breathe while waiting for an ambulance. She held my hand the entire time. At the hospital, doctors confirmed I was having false labor but advised complete bed rest to prevent early delivery. I had to rely entirely on friends for the next few weeks. KB moved his PlayStation into my bedroom to keep me company. Josh remained in jail, unable to make bail this time, but his parents hired an aggressive attorney. I had to use my recording and witness statements to fight back in court. Their attorney tried to claim I had entrapped Josh. The judge reviewed all evidence and denied Josh bail, but the stress of court appearances was affecting my health. My doctor wrote a letter allowing me to appear virtually for future hearings. My blood pressure was dangerously high again. With Josh temporarily contained, I finally had space to prepare for my baby, but I was emotionally exhausted and scared. Susie organized a small private baby shower to lift my spirits. The gifts were thoughtful and practical. The baby shower was a welcome distraction, but a gift arrived from Josh's mother with a disturbing note. We contacted my lawyer, who filed for a restraining order against her as well. The note said, "I'll be there for the birth whether you want me or not." At 38 weeks, my water broke in the middle of the night, but I was alone when it happened. I had to call an ambulance while trying to remain calm. The dispatcher stayed on the phone until help arrived. At the hospital, my contractions intensified quickly, but the nurse couldn't locate my special check-in status. I had a panic attack, terrified Josh would somehow find me. I couldn't stop crying between contractions. My doctor finally arrived and confirmed my protection status, but the labor was progressing faster than expected. There wasn't time for the epidural I had planned on. The pain was unbelievable, but I had no choice. KB and Susie arrived to support me, but the hospital only allowed one person in the delivery room. They took turns, ensuring I was never alone. KB nearly fainted during his shift. After 6 hours of excruciating labor, my beautiful daughter Lily was born, but the joy was mixed with fear as I checked every hospital staff ID. The nurses created a code word system for anyone entering my room. They used sunflower as our safety word. Holding Lily for the first time was magical, but I couldn't fully enjoy it, knowing Josh might try something. The hospital assigned security to patrol near my room. I barely slept that first night, watching Lily constantly. News of Lily's birth somehow reached Josh's mother, Marlo, but hospital security stopped her in the lobby. She created a scene demanding grandmother's rights. She tried to claim she was my mother to get past security. The hospital wanted to discharge us after 2 days, but I didn't feel safe going home. A ward helped me find a temporary safe house through a domestic violence organization. We left through a service entrance to avoid being seen. The safe house provided security and support, but I had to remain completely off social media. My friends spread misinformation about where we were staying to throw Josh off our trail. They posted about me staying at places I wasn't. Josh was released from jail pending trial, but the prosecutor had added additional charges based on new evidence. His bail conditions now included GPS monitoring. He still managed to send letters through others. I filed for sole custody of Lily, but Josh counterfiled, claiming parental rights. I had to prepare for a lengthy court battle while caring for a newborn. Lily had colic and barely slept, adding to my exhaustion. My maternity leave was running out, but returning to work meant finding childcare I could trust. I accepted my parents' offer to help, slowly rebuilding our relationship. My mom fell in love with Lily instantly. The custody hearing was scheduled, but Josh's attorney requested multiple delays. Months passed with the situation still unresolved. Every delay cost me more money I didn't have. Lily grew into a beautiful, happy 3-month-old, but I lived in constant fear whenever we left the safe house. I rarely ventured out except for necessary appointments. I missed fresh air and normal activities. At one doctor's appointment for Lily, I met Tim, a pediatric nurse who was incredibly kind, but I was too traumatized to consider dating. We became friends instead, with him offering advice about Lily's development. He gave me his number just for baby questions. After 4 months in the safe house, I found a new apartment in a secure building, but it was in a different city, away from my support network. Tim offered to help with the move since he lived nearby. He brought his truck and packed lunch for everyone. Moving day went smoothly with Tim's help, but as we unloaded the last boxes, I had a panic attack imagining Josh finding us. Tim taught me grounding techniques he used with anxious patients. His calm presence made me feel safer. The custody hearing finally arrived, but Josh appeared with witnesses claiming I was mentally unstable. I presented my extensive documentation, including testimonies from mental health professionals. My hands shook throughout my testimony. The judge reviewed all evidence but struggled with completely terminating parental rights. A compromise was reached. Josh would have supervised visitation only after completing anger management and parenting classes. I cried in the bathroom after the ruling. I was devastated about the visitation decision, but Josh's GPS monitoring showed he'd driven by my old apartment multiple times. His bail was revoked, buying me more time. The officer who arrested him actually apologized for not taking me seriously before. With Josh temporarily back in jail, I focused on creating a home for Lily, but my finances were stretched thin. Tim connected me with a local mothers group that shared childcare and resources. The group became like family to me. I slowly began to trust people again, particularly Tim, who was wonderful with Lily, but I worried about his intentions. I kept our relationship strictly in the friend zone despite growing feelings. He never pushed for more. Josh's criminal trial approached, but his lawyer offered a plea deal that seemed too lenient. I met with the prosecutor, sharing how the harassment had affected my life. The prosecutor promised to fight for appropriate consequences. The judge rejected the plea deal, sentencing Josh to 18 months, but he would be eligible for parole in just 9. I had to make the most of this time to establish stability. The sentence felt too short for what he'd done. With Josh incarcerated, I finally felt safe enough to start living again, but I struggled with residual trauma. Tim suggested a therapist specializing in PTSD and domestic abuse. The therapist helped me understand I wasn't overreacting. Therapy helped me process my experiences, but I still jumped at every unexpected noise. Tim helped me install additional security in my apartment, including cameras I controlled. He spent a whole weekend setting everything up perfectly. As Lily turned 1, Tim organized a small birthday celebration, but I hesitated to post any pictures online. We kept it intimate, with just our closest friends who understood the situation. Lily smashed her cake everywhere and giggled. After the party, Tim finally admitted he had feelings for me but respected that I might not be ready. We agreed to take things extremely slowly, with Lily's well-being as the priority. I was terrified but also hopeful. Our first official date was just coffee while my parents watched Lily, but I kept checking my phone every 5 minutes. Tim suggested we bring Lily next time, making it a family outing instead. He understood my anxiety without me explaining. Over the next few months, Tim became a constant, calming presence, but I received notice that Josh was up for early release for good behavior. We consulted my lawyer about strengthening our protection measures. I started having nightmares again. Josh was released after serving 9 months, but immediately violated his parole by removing his monitoring device. An arrest warrant was issued, putting me back on high alert. I barely slept for days after hearing the news. I requested police protection when Josh couldn't be located, but they could only drive by occasionally. Timmery moved into my guest room, not wanting me and Lily to be alone. He brought his guitar and played lullabies for Lily. 3 tense weeks passed with no sign of Josh, but I received flowers at work, with no card. Security footage confirmed they were delivered by a service, not Josh personally. The message read, "I'm watching you." The flower deliveries continued daily, but the florist refused to disclose who ordered them. Tim helped me get a lawyer to subpoena their records. Each delivery made me physically ill with anxiety. The records revealed Josh's mother was sending the flowers, but this proved they were tracking my movements. I had to switch jobs, finding remote work to limit my public exposure. I missed my co-workers, but felt safer at home. Working from home allowed me to care for Lily, but the isolation began to affect my mental health. Tim organized small gatherings at our apartment where I could socialize safely. These gatherings became weekly traditions. At one gathering, a friend's new boyfriend, Shadow, seemed oddly interested in my story, but I dismissed it as normal curiosity. I was shocked when Tim later spotted him taking pictures of our building. He had circled the block 3 times. We confronted Shadow about the photos, but he made excuses and left quickly. We reported it to the police, suspecting he was connected to Josh. The police said they'd look into it, but sounded unconvinced. Police investigation revealed Shadow was actually Josh's cousin, but they claimed there wasn't enough evidence to arrest him. Tim and I decided we needed to move again. I cried all night at the thought of starting over. Finding a new apartment quickly was challenging, but Tim suggested we look for a place together. Our relationship took a serious turn as we hunted as a couple. This time, I was excited about the move. We found a perfect place in a different neighborhood, but during the final walkthrough, I noticed someone watching from across the street. We changed our moving plans last minute using decoy vehicles. We left at 4:00 a.m. with trusted friends helping. The move was successful with no incidents, but the very next day, Josh was arrested trying to break into our old apartment. He was sent back to prison for a parole violation. I felt vindicated and relieved simultaneously. With Josh back in custody, Tim formally asked me to make our relationship official. But I worried about what would happen when Josh was eventually released again. We agreed to take it day by day, focusing on creating happy memories. Tim never pressured me for more than I could give. Lily began calling Tim Dada, naturally, but I worried about her relationship with her biological father. We consulted a child psychologist about how to handle the situation as she grew older. The psychologist was incredibly helpful. The psychologist suggested age-appropriate honesty would be best, but recommended waiting until Lily was older for details. We focused on ensuring she felt safe and loved in the present. Tim started a special bedtime routine with her. As Lily's 2nd birthday approached, Tim proposed, but I hesitated, worried it was too soon. We compromised on a long engagement, giving us time to be certain. The ring was simple but perfect. We planned a small engagement celebration, but news somehow reached Josh in prison. He began sending threatening letters addressed to Tim. One letter included a crude drawing of Tim with a knife. The prison was supposed to screen Josh's mail, but the letters continued arriving. Tim installed cameras covering every angle of our new home. We also got a dog named Cooper for additional security. Josh became eligible for release again, but his behavior in prison had been erratic. The parole board required him to complete extensive therapy before considering release. His threats against Tim worked against his release. With Josh still contained, we began planning a small wedding, but I had nightmares about him showing up. We kept all details completely off social media and used code words with vendors. We changed the venue twice as precautions. On our wedding day, security was tight, but I still felt anxious walking down the aisle. Tim arranged for KB and 2 friends to serve as discreet security. I kept scanning the crowd during the ceremony. The ceremony was beautiful, with Lily as our flower girl, but as we exchanged vows, a disturbance erupted at the entrance. The officiant quickly pronounced us married while security investigated. I nearly fainted from fear. The disruption was Josh's mother trying to enter, but she was quickly removed. We continued with our reception, refusing to let her ruin our day. I actually laughed when I heard she'd been arrested for trespassing. We postponed our honeymoon until we felt safer, but Tim surprised me with a mini-moon staycation at a local hotel. We had our first peaceful nights as a married couple while my parents watched Lily. It felt like breathing for the first time in years. Returning home, we received notice that Josh was being released, but with strict conditions, including an ankle monitor and prohibition from entering our city. We cautiously resumed normal life while maintaining vigilance. I still checked the security cameras multiple times daily. Months passed without incident, but I discovered I was pregnant again. We decided to move one final time before the baby arrived, choosing a home in a gated community. The extra security was worth the higher cost. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, but at 7 months, I spotted someone resembling Josh near Lily's preschool. We immediately switched her to a school with better security protocols. The new school understood our situation completely. The police investigated the preschool incident but couldn't confirm it was Josh. Tim installed a GPS tracker on Lily's backpack as an extra precaution. We practiced safety drills with her as a game. As my due date approached, Josh violated his parole conditions, but went into hiding before police could arrest him. We went into lockdown mode, barely leaving our home. Tim worked from home to stay with us. I went into labor 2 weeks early, but was terrified of going to the hospital. Tim arranged for a midwife and backup medical team to come to our home for the birth. The midwife was experienced and reassuring. Our son, Logan, was born healthy at home, but the stress had taken a toll on my health. Tim took family leave to care for both me and the children. I developed postpartum depression but got treatment quickly. 2 weeks after Logan's birth, police finally captured Josh, but discovered he had been living just 3 blocks from our previous apartment. We realized how close we had come to another confrontation. He had been watching our old place for weeks. Josh was sentenced to 5 years for multiple parole violations, but the judge finally granted my petition to terminate his parental rights. Tim was able to legally adopt Lily, making official what had been true in our hearts for years. The adoption ceremony made me cry with joy. The adoption day was one of the happiest of our lives, but I still found myself checking security cameras habitually. Tim suggested we join a support group for families affected by stalking. The group helped me realize I wasn't alone. The support group connected us with resources and similar families, but I struggled to share our story openly. Tim encouraged me to start a private blog as therapy. Writing became my way of processing everything. Writing about my experiences was cathartic, but I worried about privacy. I used pseudonyms and changed identifying details while still conveying the emotional truth. The blog helped me organize my thoughts. My blog unexpectedly gained followers, but I wasn't ready for public attention. I worked with a domestic violence organization to turn my experiences into resources for others while maintaining anonymity. My story helped other women recognize warning signs. As the children grew, we established holiday traditions and family rituals, but I sometimes caught myself scanning crowds for Josh's face. Tim and I developed subtle signals to help ground me when anxiety struck. He would squeeze my hand 3 times for I love you. Lily started asking questions about her biological father, but we weren't sure how much to reveal. We consulted her therapist about age-appropriate explanations. The therapist gave us scripts to follow. Following professional advice, we told Lily a simplified truth about Josh, but she worried he might take her away. We reassured her with facts about our legal protections and security measures. Tim showed her his adoption certificate often. When Logan turned 3 and Lily was 6, we received news that Josh was being released early, but strict conditions prevented him from contacting us. We cautiously planned our first real family vacation. We chose a beach destination with security. Our beach vacation was magical, watching the children play freely, but I noticed a familiar car following us on the drive home. We contacted police, who intercepted Josh 50 miles from our house. He had violated his conditions immediately. This final violation resulted in Josh losing all possibility of early release, but his obsession seemed undiminished. After years, the prosecutor helped us relocate through a victim protection program, allowing us a truly fresh start. We moved to another state entirely. In our new community, no one knew our history, but I worried about starting over again. Tim reminded me that home wasn't a place, but wherever our family was together. He was right, as always. 5 years after Logan's birth, we gathered for a family portrait in our backyard. But just as the photographer clicked the shutter, we received news that Josh had attempted to find our new address using a prison computer system, and was caught in the act. His sentence was extended by 10 years, giving us the security to finally, truly relax. As I looked at my beautiful children playing with Tim, the man who had stood by us through everything, I realized that despite the nightmare that led us here, we had created something beautiful, a family built on love, trust, and the kind of resilience that can only come from weathering the storm.